Good evening and welcome back to another episode of The Longing, where today we are once again going to be continuing to read The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. So, let's get going. The water, when he eventually reached it with a loud splash, proved quite cold enough for his taste, though its chill was not sufficient to quell his proud spirit or slake the heat of his furious temper. He rose to the surface spluttering, and when he had wiped the duckweed out of his eyes, the first thing he saw was the fat barge woman looking back at him over the stern of the retreating barge and laughing, and he vowed, as he coughed and choked, to be even with her. He struck out for the shore, but the cotton gown greatly impeded his efforts, and when at length he touched land he found it hard to climb up the steep bank unassisted. He had to take a minute or two's rest to recover his breath. Then, gathering his wet skirts well over his arms, he started to run after the barge as fast as his legs would carry him, wild with indignation, thirsting for revenge. The barge woman was still laughing when he drew up level with her. "Put yourself through your mangle, washerwoman," she called out, "and iron your face and crimp it, and you'll pass for quite a decent-looking toad." Toad never paused to reply. Solid revenge was what he wanted, not cheap, windy verbal triumphs, though he had a thing or two in his mind that he would have liked to say. He saw what he wanted ahead of him. Running swiftly on, he overtook the horse, unfastened the tow rope, and cast off, jumped lightly on the horse's back, and urged it to a gallop by kicking it vigorously in the sides. He steered for the open country, abandoning the towpath, and swinging his steed down a rutty lane. Once he looked back and saw that the barge had run aground on the other side of the canal, and the barge woman was gesticulating wildly and shouting, "Stop! Stop! Stop!" "I've heard that song before," said Toad, laughing, as he continued to spur his steed onward in its wild career. The barge horse was not capable of any very sustained effort, and its gallop soon subsided into a trot, and its trot into an easy walk. But Toad was quite contented with this, knowing that he, at any rate, was moving, and the barge was not. He had quite recovered his temper, now that he had done something he thought really clever, and he was satisfied to jog along quietly in the sun, steering his horse along byways and bridle paths, and trying to forget how very long it was since he had had a square meal, till the canal had been left very far behind him. He had travelled some miles, his horse and he was feeling drowsy in the hot sunshine, when the horse stopped, lowered his head, and began to nibble the grass. And Toad, waking up, just saved himself from falling off by an effort. He looked about him and found he was on a wide common, dotted with patches of gorse and bramble as far as he could see. Near him stood a dingy gypsy caravan, and beside it a man was sitting on a bucket turned upside down, very busy smoking and staring into the wide world. A fire of sticks was burning nearby, and over the fire hung an iron pot, and out of that pot came forth bubblings and gurglings, and a vague suggestive steaminess. Also smells, warm, rich, and varied smells, that twined and twisted and wreathed themselves at last into one complete, voluptuous, perfect smell, that seemed like the very soul of nature taking form and appearing to her children, a true goddess, a mother of solace and comfort. Toad now knew well that he had not been really hungry before. What he had felt earlier in the day had been a mere trifling qualm. This was the real thing at last, and no mistake. And it would have to be dealt with speedily too, or there would be trouble for somebody or something. He looked the gypsy over carefully, wondering vaguely whether it would be easier to fight him or cajole him. So there he sat and sniffed, and looked at the gypsy, and the gypsy sat and smoked, and looked at him. Presently the gypsy took his pipe out of his mouth and remarked in a careless way, "Want to sell that there horse of yours?" Toad was completely taken aback. He did not know that gypsies were very fond of horse-dealing, and never missed an opportunity, and he had not reflected that caravans were always on the move, and took a deal of drawing. It had not occurred to him to turn the horse into cash, but the gypsy's suggestion seemed to smooth the way towards the two things he wanted so badly: ready money and a solid breakfast. "What?" he said. "Me sell this beautiful young horse of mine? Oh no, it's out of the question. Who's going to take the washing home to my customers every week? Besides, I'm too fond of him, and he simply dotes on me." "Try and love a donkey," suggested the gypsy. "Some people do." "You don't seem to me," continued the toad, "that this fine horse of mine is a cut above you altogether. He's a blood horse, he is, partly. Not the part you see, of course, another part. And he's been a prize hackney, too, in his time. That was the time before you knew him, but you can still tell it on him at a glance, if you understand anything about horses. No, it's not to be thought of for a moment. All the same, how much might you be disposed to offer me for this beautiful young horse of mine?" The gypsy looked the horse over, and then he looked Toad over with equal care, and looked at the horse again. "Shillin' a leg," he said briefly, and turned away, continuing to smoke and try to stare the wide world out of countenance. "A shilling a leg?" cried Toad. "If you please, I must take a little time to work that out and see just what it comes to." He climbed down off his horse and left it to graze, and sat down by the gypsy, and did sums on his fingers. And at last he said, "A shilling a leg? Why, that comes to exactly 4 shillings and no more. Oh no, I could not think of accepting 4 shillings for this beautiful young horse of mine." "Well," said the gypsy, "I'll tell you what I will do. I'll make it 5 shillings, and that's 3 and 6pence more than the animal's worth, and that's my last word." Then Toad sat and pondered long and deeply, for he was hungry and quite penniless, and still some way, he knew not how far, from home, and enemies might still be looking for him. To one in such a situation, 5 shillings may very well appear a large sum of money. On the other hand, it did not seem very much to get for a horse. But then again, the horse hadn't cost him anything, so whatever he got was all clear profit. At last he said firmly, "Look here, gypsy, I tell you what we will do, and this is my last word. You shall hand me over 6 shillings and 6pence, cash down, and further, in addition thereto, you shall give me as much breakfast as I can possibly eat, at one sitting, of course, out of that iron pot of yours that keeps sending forth such delicious and exciting smells. In return I will make over to you my spirited young horse, with all the beautiful harness and trappings that are on him, freely thrown in. If that's not good enough for you, say so, and I'll be getting on. I know a man near here who's wanted this horse of mine for years." The gypsy grumbled frightfully, and declared if he did a few more deals of that sort he'd be ruined. But in the end he lugged a dirty canvas bag out of the depths of his trouser pocket, and counted out 6 shillings and 6pence into Toad's paw. Then he disappeared into the caravan for an instant, and returned with a large iron plate, and a knife, fork, and spoon. He tilted up the pot, and a glorious stream of hot rich stew gurgled into the plate. It was, indeed, the most beautiful stew in the world, being made of partridges and pheasants and chickens and hares and rabbits and peahens and guinea fowls and 1 or 2 other things. Toad took the plate on his lap, almost crying, and stuffed and stuffed and stuffed, and kept asking for more. And the gypsy never grudged it him. He thought that he had never eaten so good a breakfast in all his life. And with that, we're actually going to come to the end of the episode, because there isn't quite enough time to do another page, really. So, there we have it. Yes. Right, well, I will say we are actually getting surprisingly close to the end of The Wind in the Willows. Still not really seeing a end point, a lesson, so to speak. But anyway, we'll see what the end brings. So I'll say thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon or night. No matter what time of day it is, I hope you all have a wonderful one of it. And as always, we will be back tomorrow for more of The Longing. Goodbye.